Canine Detection Collaborative, a detection dog training trio with Stacy Barnett.
Hi.
Robin Greubel.
Hey there.
And Crystal Wing.
What's up?
With humor and a big dose of theory, our trio talks practical training advice and features interviews with top trainers and scientists. It's Canine Detection Collaborative.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Canine Detection Collaborative. This is Robin Greubel, and I am here with my amazingly awesome co-hosts who we are all broiling in the Iowa heat at the moment because we're here in Iowa, all of us together for distraction camp and intentional handling and height setting. But I'm here with Crystal Wing.
Hello, friends.
And Stacy Barnett.
Hello.
One of the things that I got the privilege to sit and listen into both of you guys interview Petra Ford. Fabulous, fun interview. And I've started binge listening to her brand new podcast. But one of the things that I really tickled my brain was when she was talking about working with one of her dogs, and the dog was offering a behavior. And she's like, I will bet you 100 lots of money that this dog thought it was sitting square. And she reinforced the dog anyway. And sometimes, and it was the whole concept of when you're working on complex behavior chains of sometimes you accept less in certain areas. And so we just came off of, I just did a whole section of teaching for the academy. We had Muscatatuck, we've had all of the classes and everything. And it became so apparent to me that we talk a lot about everything has to be perfect all of the time. But in detection work or even in agility work, and I know Crystal in the complex behavior stuff that you guys do for protection sports, those are long chains of behavior.
Oh, yes, they are.
And trying to do them all in one big long chain and make them perfect every time, you can't do it. So I wanted to pull that apart and talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a really great topic because it really does come down to you got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I think we can definitely be so focused on perfection that it's easy to ignore like really fantastic work that the dog's given us. And if you try to then like they give you all this great work and then you go to like adjust or correct or whatever you want to call it, the last little bit or some small piece of it, how the repercussions of that really can be felt, I think, across the rest of the behavior chain, especially when you're dealing with a very long behavior chain. And a lot of times, even, with detection, we can deal with some long behavior chains. I mean, I just look at like the refined behavior with a recall refined. I mean, you want to talk about a complex behavior chain is a recall refined. And especially when you're adding distance to that. So I've seen Prize do, I mean, she's done recall refined over, like 600 feet plus type of deal, which is basically like a couple of football fields, right? And over varied terrain, and then having to do her down at my feet, which I could be on varied terrain. And when you start thinking about how complex that behavior chain is and how much effort that goes into it, and if you do have something that's kind of minor, I mean, for me, I kind of like, okay, I make a note of it. And then I'm like, okay, well, next time I come out here, or next time I may want to do a drill or something that's going to try to tighten up a piece of it. But I'm not going to try to, I'm not going to not reinforce her because she didn't get her elbows on the ground or something like that. I'm like, okay, noted. I need to work on that because maybe you're tired and you've been out here for an hour already.
Or you can wear the air because it's really humid.
Oof. Exactly. So I think we do need to be careful with that because we can get on the train of has to be perfect that we can end up discouraging really good work from the dog.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what lesson are you working on with that particular repetition or with the lesson that you're setting up for the day. And dabbling in the bird dog work, I learned that. And even I've been talking a lot about it in a way it really resonated with me is as I've been working through some of the more advanced stuff with my academy students, we talk about teaching scent theory to the dogs. And if people are like, what do you mean you have to teach scent theory? And I'm like, well, this is the intentional handling part of it. I mean, yeah, they can figure it out, but you have to call it. Are they alerting on a scent pool or is it actual odor or what are you doing? And
yeah,
you're balancing all sorts of things. And sometimes, no, you don't need your full train final response. Or, you know what? No, you don't have a long nose time because it's all about how can they solve the one piece that you need them to solve. Are you moving them from red to pink or whatever?
yeah. I mean, the whole process of problem solving a complex hide is a huge, long, complex behavior chain, right? It's not necessarily, or huge, long, complex behavior. I don't know. Maybe chain may not be the right word for it, but when you get a dog and they have to like really kind of figure stuff out and work stuff out, then sometimes adding on that TFR.
Then it becomes the TFR. Are you having reinforcing for TFR stuff or are you reinforcing for scent theory? And it's the hunt portion or whatever you're working on. And it allows you to dissect it in that one specific location so that we don't have to worry about a TFR issue.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to think of like the different behavior chains that we do have in detection. So one of them, I talked about the recall refine. And I think we have a good example of Robin, when you're working Nico and you are using intermittent reinforcement.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start thinking of it that way, when you've got the multiple hides and you're doing intermittent reinforcement, you really are doing an extremely long chain.
Yes. It's a long chain of behavior with multiple alerts in there. And the whole thing becomes a self-reinforcing behavior.
What do you mean by intermittent?
Variable schedule of reinforcement, intermittent reinforcement.
What do you mean by that? For people that don't know what that is.
He doesn't get paid. I don't have a continuous rate of reinforcement. So what we do a lot in detection work is every time the dog alerts, the dog gets paid. And that's continuous reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement is really, really great at building behavior. Think Coke machine. And then when you want to maintain and make a behavior resilient, you put it on intermittent reinforcement. Thank you, slot machine. So not every time Nico or any of my detection dogs go out and work, do they get their primary reinforcer for when they alert, because I don't know if it's there. And do I trust my dogs? Yes. Do I tell somebody that my dog alerted? Absolutely. Does that result in all sorts of other flurry things? Yes. Do I feel the need to reinforce my dog every time when I can't absolutely say that this is the thing they're looking for? No, because I've put it on my dog in training that they don't need that. And guess what? Sometimes when you miss the squirrel, the drive for that squirrel becomes even better.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
I think about the vending machine at school because probably 1 out of 6 times the thing gets stuck. And you'll see the kids just become these furious little beasts of like pounding and banging on the machine. So you always say intermittent. I'm always thinking about the kid that's like trying even harder because they lost their $1.25.
Right. Right. Well, and that's the fallout from a continuous rate of reinforcement. Your animal, whether it's the human expecting Nutter Butter,
their Snickers bar,
right, or whatever, But if occasionally you put your $1.25 in and you're like, well, yeah, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it does work, it gives you 3 Snicker bars.
Oh
and that's
God.
what the next kid gets. And that kid's like, woohoo.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually, all of a sudden I had a thought based off of that. And because I never really thought of it this way. I want to go back to the recall, refine, and the whole intermittent schedule of reinforcement. If you think about it, each ping pong is actually on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement.
Yeah.
If you have a tendency to vary where you reinforce in order to have more heavily reinforce certain parts of the behavior chain than others. And when they actually complete the entire chain and get reinforced, that's actually the end of the, like, almost an intermittent chain, if you think about it, right? I'm trying to think about this because it got to the point where when she gave me the down and I would say, show me became a reinforcer, like a secondary reinforcer for her, right?
Yes.
So when that show me became the secondary reinforcer and that down, all of a sudden she powered back up and would run back to the subject, right? With like, well, I wonder if this next time I come and lay down, if I'm going to get my ball, or if we're going to do the whole chain, or if we're going to do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because then you're teasing apart.
Yeah.
They don't know which part of the chain is going to get reinforced.
Yeah. Because every so often you keep it variable.
Right. That just is putting a different point on the chain on a intermittent schedule of reinforcement, which is exactly what Crystal and those guys all do in your insanely, 45-minute long obedience routines or something crazy.
Yeah, that's Mondio Ring 3.
Yes.
But I was just thinking along the lines of, if once you say show me, that becomes a secondary reinforcer. That's kind of like you saying, doing your thank you, clap, find another.
Right.
It's the same thought.
Yeah.
It's just that there is only one, in air quotes, source of odor, which is your live human at that point.
Right. Yeah.
But it is actually kind of it's along the same lines. It just had me, because I hadn't thought of it that way before, along the lines of intermittent schedule, but it does seem to kind of fit.
Yeah.
I know we talked about kind of rewarding mistakes, and I really feel like when I started rewarding mistakes, it taught me a lot more about my training, even more than my dog's behavior ever did. Because when I started rewarding the almosts, especially Radish and actually all 3 of my dogs, it feels like my dog started showing with more joy. And I love what Petra said, is she said free. And I love that explanation about the dog being free to do things. And I really thought that rewarding the wrong stuff would ruin my training. Because I think back to Jens. Jens is very black and white. I remember sitting at dinner with him up here in Iowa, and he was very adamant, never reward anything that's wrong. If it's wrong, don't reward it. And he has a very kind of Skinner box kind of mentality. And when you look up to someone like him, and I'm like, wow, he's such a great trainer, I also have to realize that I deviate in how I train from, other people that even I admire. And that's been something that it takes some courage to do, I think, because I really thought that it was going to ruin my training. But what it really did was it kind of ruined my frustration. So I'll share a little example. Checkmate last year at the ranch in California, Petaluma, is the FDSA ranch with Denise. I was struggling with Checkmate, would hear the cue. So I was doing motion exercises where you're walking, you ask the dog to sit in motion. So you keep walking, the dog sits. And he would down or he would stand. And he was getting frustrated and I was getting frustrated. And so Denise made me reward every repetition, no matter if he did it right or wrong. That really blew my brains. Because if I was walking and I said sit and he stood, I had to go back and reward it. Okay, so then I'm thinking, if I do that, it's going to ruin all of my training. But instead, what it did, it made me rethink how I think about mistakes, because they're not disobedience. They're just part of that path of him trying to understand what we're trying to do. So when I stopped saying no, I started seeing how much he was actually trying. And that was a huge moment for me, because even though I rewarded a stand when I asked for a down, on the next rep, he did it perfectly. Or if he didn't, it was aversive to me because I was like, I don't want to keep rewarding bad things. It taught me to go back and set up my situation differently, set up my environment differently, break it down a little better so that I didn't have those mistakes. But it absolutely, I'm telling you, I was so uncomfortable the first time I did this. But the second time, it really felt like relief for both of us because he knew he was going to be right. And I knew that I was going to try to make him more right. And so when I softened my training, my dog got stronger. And I think people would say, oh, you're just being too soft and you're being too forgiving or whatever, but it changed everything.
Well, and to hear you explain it like that, what Denise actually did is she used pressure on you since you knew you were going to have to reinforce everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You then had to figure out and manipulate whatever you were doing and change your behavior or the environment so that he could be right.
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 Yeah.
So it actually, yes, absolutely makes you a better trainer. And as long as I have no problem with people doing that, absolutely no problem with doing that. But it's not that you're rewarding mistakes that your dog made, because as a trainer, we weren't manipulating the environment correctly to help our learner learn.
And the biggest lesson I got out of it was how much my dog was actually trying. And that was the best lesson I possibly ever could have got. And it continued into this last summer with Radish. She, talking about pressure, that poor girl, she does not want to be close. Like this is a dog that lays on me and sleeps on me in bed, okay? But when it comes to training, she needs to be an arm length away and looking at you, kind of a side eye almost sometimes. And she's ready to go get her toy. But that being close is so much pressure. And what she did not need from me is to correct her. And that's through my odor work, my closeness anyway. She needed me to help her feel more right. And what we did a lot of was if she came in close at all, I reward her. And how I reinforced her and where I reinforced her became really important. But she was never wrong. She could just be more right. And that was a huge lesson to help her build her confidence. That was a really big piece of how I've grown as a trainer. So for instance, she was like 4 feet away and off to my side. I reinforced her by throwing between my legs. She couldn't go between my legs to get the food, like a bridge. She ran around me. And so it was just lots and lots of reinforcement using closeness to me and then using just dropping between my legs and then getting closer each time. Now you would never know it. She goes and I can cue her to go between my legs from behind. Then I cue her to be free and then come into a front position and then get into heel position. And it's beautiful. And she looks so happy about it because I quit saying no. I had to get no out of my vocabulary.
Is that actually rewarding mistakes or is that just shaping?
No, I rewarded mistakes. So if I would say to sit and she stood, I rewarded everything. It made her more confident.
Right.
But what is your criteria, the closeness, or was your criteria closeness with a sit? I guess that's what I'm trying to say is that if you're working on closeness, then it wouldn't matter if she was sitting or standing because that becomes a criteria is getting close, right?
Yeah, anything that was almost, I rewarded. So even if I said sit and she stood, in my old way, I would have been like, oh, sorry, babe, you didn't do it right.
Right.
Okay.
And instead, I rewarded that.
And I guess that's where I go with like a shaping type of thing. Like it's not always the full behavior when you're trying to shape a behavior into something that you're looking for. And you do reinforce now we're trying to chip away and we're trying to kind of sculpt what we have, but it doesn't need to be progressively more perfect every repetition. And sometimes things slide and then they come back again. And that's kind of, it's like I'm thinking about like Jack's cap work that I'm working on right now, right? And Robin was actually just helping me. We were out in the training building and we were trying to add a little bit of duration on his stare because I'm not really necessarily adding a sit on it, but he has a stare and I add a duration and then it starts to back up a little bit. And Robin's like, change your reinforcement location to try to pull him in. So he still got reinforced. He wasn't wrong. I don't think it was necessarily a mistake. He's trying to figure it out. I guess there, I don't quantify that as a mistake. I quantify that as just kind of the learning process. And I don't know. So maybe we're splitting hairs and probably saying the same thing.
I think the only difference is my dog knows what the cues mean. So like if I say sit in a different context, she knows what sit means, and she knows what down means, and she knows what stand means. So because she knows those words, I would say more that's a mistake.
Okay.
So it's not that I'm shaping something fresh that she's never done before,
right?
But I'm rewarding any mistake because I'm not reinforcing the mistake. I'm just reinforcing her willingness to keep trying. And that's what I really have to make sure with her, because any punishment I give her, and a punishment for her, it's not like I'm yanking and cranking or beating on her. It's simply it's my attitude, I think, is what's the hardest part. And that's the thing that I've really had to work on. Yeah, because when she makes a mistake, what I really find is that I have a really clear answer when they do the right thing. I know what reinforcement I want to use. When they make a mistake, I hesitate. And that little bit of hesitation is that lack of clarity. And she reads it even stronger than a less soft dog, like a more confident dog. So with our softer dogs, especially, I feel like that just that little moment of hesitation of, I don't know what I want to do in this moment, is enough that they go, peace out. Mm-hmm. Like something's not clear. You don't know what you're doing. I don't know how I feel about this. Because I see that with my bitey dogs, if I do that hesitation, they tend to react with wanting to bite you, or you have the barky dogs that they want to bark at you. And I honestly, I handle that way better. I handle the ones that want to come up in their arousal and they want to lash out in that frustration. I handle that way easier. I've had more experience at that just with bitey dogs. Mm-hmm. And so with her, when I have just that moment of hesitation of, I don't know what I'm doing next, it's harder for me because she goes down.
Right. Yeah. That was one of those interesting things that we talked, I think, a little bit about in the Distraction Camp download, was that depending on stress, the dog's arousal may go up or they may cycle down.
Right.
And so Rad obviously cycles down.
I want her to be that dog that feels free to make mistakes, and she's more creative about how she responds. And the only way I could do that is to reinforce all of the almosts. And it doesn't mean I have to give her the highest level of reinforcer, but sometimes it does. I mean, I'll give her a big party for doing something totally wrong. And it's what I have to do to get that trust built. And I think the biggest thing that I'm really learning right now, and this is a self part that I'm working on, is when I'm learning to accept the mistakes in her, it's really helping me to do the same for myself, because I know she doesn't expect perfection. I can't be perfect, but I'm sure going to try the best I can. It's really helping me understand that part of me, I guess.
So it was also very interesting when you mentioned the hesitation, and my mind went to building duration behaviors. And this is also something I think I talked with a student about this the other day, and how when she added a slight pause and didn't give the dog the marker immediately, the dog started to show frustration behaviors. So that's the arousal that we're talking about, is either some dogs kind of dip down and some dogs dip up. And in this case, the frustration behavior can come out with how the dog may throw some other behaviors, that sort of thing. And what's very interesting to me is when we start to bring in the D of duration, and when we start to think about it, sometimes that is adding a little bit of delay here or there. And like I go back to, like, if you're working on a TFR and you're working on the duration, how you have to keep that variable. Otherwise, because as humans, we tend to be very consistent with timing of different cues and everything that we give the dog. And we don't even know it, that we tend to get on these patterns. We're very pattern based. So when we start to add in pauses, which happens a lot, like if you're doing nose work and you're calling alert and you're waiting, you're not sure or whatever, where that little pause can make the dog go, oh, I'm not sure if I'm correct or not, or they can start to give that frustration behavior and you can get some added behaviors. That I also wonder if there's something along the lines of, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud right now, with using a variable duration to also help to build some of the resilience in our dogs. And as we start to think about changing up and be just very cognizant of our own patterns as handlers, that when we change up those patterns a little bit, we may see I think it does help to actually build some of that resilience in when we do change up that our pattern or our own cadence, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting for us to talk about these things and let people know that, like, right now, I'm spending a whole bunch of time figuring. I've got 2 puppies under the age of 5 months.
Yes.
Right?
And we're working all 3 of them together. So mine too.
Well, okay, when we say all together, they're not all together out at the same time, because that would just be a
they're all
cluster.
separate. They're not, yeah.
Right.
But when we train, we get to get, yeah, that's right. When we train, we do them sequentially.
That would just be
training.
WWE with puppies, right?
No, that's in the backyard.
Yeah. But there's literally a lot of the puppies saying, no, not today.
Yeah.
And you look at it and you go, okay, we won't do that today.
Yeah.
Because I swear, Belle grew 2 inches overnight.
Oh, she
one
did.
night.
She did. Yeah.
Just,
I can attest to that. I was gone for a few days and I came back and I'm like, who's that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at Jack and I'm like, today you're longer. Today you're taller. Today you have thick legs. Today you have thin legs.
Mako just seems to kind of like get bigger, but then all of a sudden his paws got big and I'm like, oh, shit. But,
Right.
And so it's like, are you getting ready to go through a growth spurt? Did you just go through a growth spurt? Do your teeth hurt?
Right. Is it all of a sudden 10 degrees hotter than yesterday?
Right. And so it's just one of those things where you're like, okay, you know what? We'll just come in and we'll work on this today. We're just going to have fun and play with things. And so that's what we're doing. And so sometimes it is just, you know what? I don't even know if I look at it at some point when you're teaching a behavior or you're working on teaching certain specific things. Am I, especially if I don't have a baseline with the dog? Yes, Radish knows her cues, all of those sorts of things. And if you're working on a closer cue, the only criterion might be that you're closer.
I don't really have a closer cue though.
Right. Or
it was just working on just the proximity to me. And even just getting on having a mat that she's really sticky to, she was like, can't do it. I can put my 1 foot on it, but I can't put 2 feet on it. And so I reward that. And so technically that's a mistake. And so that's where I have to ask myself, what did I think reward worthy meant before this?
Right.
Because before that mat away from me, she could easily, I could say Kato and she goes stand with all 4 feet on it. But all of a sudden, when it's 2 feet from me, she can put 1 foot on it. And if I re-cue Kato again, she's going to say, nope, I can't, I'm out. And instead, I'm going to reward that 1 foot on, even though it's a fluent behavior in every other position except for right in front of me.
Yeah. And that's really interesting that you can read that. And kudos for you for thinking outside the box and realizing that that's not actually a mistake.
That's what changed when I had to assume my dog is always trying. And that's the big game changer for me is I always have to assume they're trying.
Yeah. And as long as you have an engaged dog,
yes,
right, they're trying.
And the big thing too, I think going back to earlier, I keep thinking about this question that I asked myself. How do I feel when I'm withholding reinforcement? Because knowing how sensitive she is, I think that was a big thing too, is I don't like to withhold reinforcement. That doesn't feel good. And if I'm doing something in my training that doesn't feel good, I guarantee she feels it too.
Mm.
And I think what she's really teaching me is that the same thing is happening with my more pushy Malinois, but he's taking it out in a different way.
Right.
So when I'm withholding the reinforcement and I don't feel good about it because I wish in that moment I would have set something up differently, or I know that I could have done this, or I don't know what the hell I'm doing because, this is all like going to heck. And I'm like, he acts in a different way, but I'm now starting to realize it's the same things. It's just, I see it so much easier in her because she goes down so fast.
Right.
So just my feelings, I have to be more aware of that so that when I do withhold reinforcement, how is that showing up in my body? And that's also been a good learning curve for me. It's all these things I've been thinking about lately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But here's the thing though, is when I know it's working, I see her being way happier. I see her trying a lot more. I see her being so much more fluid now in her problem solving. She's a different dog. From the time that I got to California, beginning of June to the end of June, there's no hesitation. She just wants to try it, and she wants to try it a different way. And she's like, how about this? How about this? And I love, and I think that's when Petra talked about being free. That's how I perceive it, is I see her being, and when you say happy, I know she does smile though. I've got that on cue, but you know what I'm talking about. But the way that I'm happy is in her willingness to try new things and problem solve with me. And I think here, I love the example of the odor work we did here. So she went into an odor pool, and she was probably, 8 feet away from odor in the toy box, something like that. And the toy box is one of the buildings here on the farm. And instead of my previous self, I would have said, oh, try again, which is really a non-reward marker. It means you didn't do it right. Try again. And instead, I approached it differently. And I said, good girl, because I wanted her to know, you're correct. You're in odor. All I did was say, good girl. And she got up and tried again on her own because she felt that confidence now through me. But I've taught that all through my obedience work. So now that confidence and that resilience is transferring into my odor work. So when I'm saying, good girl, keep going in my obedience, now when I say it in my odor stuff, she's like, you're right. I can do better. Give me a second. Let me go find it better. And it's such a cool thing to see how that transfers. And that's why I try to teach all of these concepts outside of odor, because that would have been really hard to teach in odor itself.
Right.
So I have another example of an odor thing that we ran into where I ended up reinforcing something that wasn't quite perfect. Robin, the hide you set in the toy box in the tractor.
Yeah.
Yes. And we worked the dogs, and it turned out it was in the tractor, and I think it was large source. And it created a huge odor pool in the corner of the toy box. We should probably mention what the toy box is. It's a big building where Joe keeps all of his toys.
Yes. It's a very large farm
huge building with tons
storage
of tractors.
building. Yes. Lots of tractors and farm equipment.
Yes, it's amazing. So it's Joe's toys.
Yes.
Joe's toys. So there was large source when we had it on, it was elevated in a tractor, and it created this huge odor pool in the far corner with all these other tractors. And Prize went over, and she's showing me all this odor pool behavior, and the odor pool seemed to be disconnected from the source because I'd pull her back out and she'd lose it. And I did a little bit of intentional handling. She got towards, and she worked really, really hard, gets up, finally figures out where it is. And she comes down into like more of a sit. And then she dropped to a down. And I rewarded the heck out of it because she worked really hard versus a complete down. But she got through the bigger part of really what the intention of the exercise was, which was the scent theory.
Well, I think that's where when people say what gets reinforced gets repeated, but really reinforcement doesn't have to mean you nailed it. It's that emotional safety that you create. The dogs aren't going to offer it if they fear being shut down. You let her continue. You built resilience really because you rewarded that effort. And that's what's going to build the grit and the problem solving in our dogs. So it's a beautiful example.
Right.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what Petra said of literally sometimes the dog showing effort and you getting across the one point is better than the whole thing being perfect.
Right. Because in that situation, she made the decision about the location of the inaccessible. She made the decision to do the TFR. The TFR just wasn't perfect.
Right. And I think that one of the things that I love that sentiment, I absolutely agree with the ability for us to be able to do that so that we don't get rigid in our training. But we also have to, with that, throw in the cautionary tale of you can't reside in that land too long or you're going to end up with sloppy chains.
Right.
It's been really interesting having, I've talked to so many people over the last 2 weeks about training because they'll ask me questions. I'm like, it's all about balance. Do you want a red dog or a pink dog? You have to balance that out.
Totally.
Right. do you want this? Well, you have to balance this with this. You have to balance this with this.
Yeah.
And it's reading, where do I need to spend more time for? Maybe one of the things that I learned with Mako is that I had overbalanced him on, because I was working on with casting with him as a puppy. He's 4.5 months old, right? So we're working on casting for bird dog stuff. And I had casted him too many times to the left. And so really all it took was me doing 5 or 6 repetitions casting to the right. And now he's like, okay, which way do you want me to go? And he was totally dialed in. And then he was taking the cues better. But I had obviously somewhere in the dog told me with his behavior how I had overbalanced him on one direction. And so as we're going through and doing some of our training, it's always that, what balance are you trying to strike?
Yeah. So something that's really important about what you just said there, how do you know when you have the right balance? And what I look for is, what does your dog do when they're not sure? Do they freeze? Do they offer frantic stuff? Do they leave? Like, that's how you know when you have the right balance. So look at your dog's behavior and you'll know in their reaction what's going on.
So I was actually kind of thinking about, Robin, what you were saying in terms of the balance. And I want to go back to the example I gave about the TFR that Prize did that wasn't perfect. And I think it's important to kind of think about your training on a whole and not necessarily look at things on a single occurrence perspective. And what you did with Mako was kind of, you take a look at what he did, and if we want to call it an error or not quite or not perfect or whatever, right? And the part of that discussion then becomes, what are we going to do next? So for instance, if I go back to my example where she didn't give me a perfect TFR, well, if I also kind of think about like refined, if I start seeing that something and like not quite, the elbows aren't quite down and that sort of thing, then I need to think about the next training session. What do I need to do to make sure that I can tighten up that piece of the chain if it needs to be tightened up? Because sometimes an occurrence of one is not necessarily a pattern. So you have to decide, is it actually a pattern or was it a one-time mistake? One-time mistakes are not necessarily a problem. A lot of times we get really hung up like, oh, the dog didn't do whatever, and it happened once. But one time is not a pattern. I don't get concerned about anything unless I start to see a pattern. So if my dog starts to do something and I'm seeing that same hesitation where she starts to lower more slowly and I see more latency in giving me a down, right? Then I need to think about, right, now I might have a training issue that I might need to tighten up. But if it happens once, it may not have been an actual issue. So I think we have to be careful when we're thinking about what errors are, that sometimes things just happen once, and don't sweat over it unless you actually see a pattern about it.
I will go with that because I have a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, my dog did this. And I'm like, how many times? I'm like, well, where were you? What were you doing? All of these, I start asking all of these questions. And it turns out that it might have been a one-off thing.
Yeah. Like maybe it's just a really hard situation and the dog just wasn't. Yeah.
Right. Take data.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll give you once, twice. I go, so noted. The third time you do a behavior, then we start going, okay, what is going on that this has now come in? And so it's one of those things. And just like what we were doing with Jack today, when I was like, okay, be careful. He's staring at his cap and he's starting to shift backwards as on duration. I'm like, so here's where you place your reinforcement to help combat that. And it also told us back up on reinforcement just a half a second so that he gets the idea of don't move. And it's all of those little things Can you adjust something immediately to fix it? Sure. Or do you have to take data? Because that's also important. Or do you literally just go, okay, that was a one-off. I'm not going to get too weirded out about it. And I do have that conversation with people when they call me, oh my God, my dog did this. I'm like, okay, how many times does that? Well, this is the first time ever. Call me if it happens 2 more times. Keep track of it.
And that's what I'm trying really hard to, I'm asking myself, how am I responding when my dog gets it wrong? And I'm asking myself really hard questions about, what stories am I telling myself about that mistake? And that's where I'm really trying to be more thoughtful about taking the pieces out of the chain, breaking them down, and looking at my environment and being very thoughtful about that, because I know that they're trying. I mean, they're showing me they like my reinforcer, my rewards. They enjoy training. They're in the game with me. And so they're telling me they want to do it. It's about me making it clear and bringing that clarity to the training session.
I like that. Everybody who's listening, unless you're driving, rewind that and listen to that piece from Crystal again. Because the bringing clarity.
I was thinking earlier, even earlier what Stacy said. Yeah, even earlier what Stacy said. What I'm trying to do now, and it's a different way of looking at what Stacy said, is I'm trying to change my training and thinking about every attempt as valuable. So it's the same idea, just a little different spin on it. So it's yes, they made a mistake, but the mistake is information. And so I'm looking at every single repetition as something that was valuable, and they put effort forward. And what am I going to do with that effort? And that's when I ask myself, what does it feel like for me if I withhold reinforcement? What does it feel like if I change my environment? What does it feel like? Because how I feel about it is just as important to my training. So that's something I'm really thinking a lot about.
Awesome.
Okay, ladies.
Yeah.
Takeaways.
I really, really think that in the pursuit of perfection, we need to realize that it's not always the perfect journey, and really look at our training from a holistic perspective and don't sweat the small stuff sometimes. Sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't. That's part of the craft.
I think Radish did not need me to correct her. She needed me to help her feel more right. And in that, she's taught me that with all of my dogs. And I was worried that rewarding mistakes, that it's not going to reinforce the mistake. It reinforces the dog's willingness to keep trying. And that's what she's really taught me. And I think Denise and Petra and Laura Wadby has been a big one. I took her team class. And for instance, in there, I'm working on fronts with Rad. And if she came in crooked, I would reinforce her. And then I would physically move my body so that I'm feeding her in the correct position. And sure enough, after a few repetitions of me moving to the right spot, she started moving to the right spot without my help. And so I know that punishing a mistake is going to shut down learning. And I know that reinforcing it is what's been the key for us to keep it going and keep that energy and that willingness to keep going. So if your dog keeps making the same mistake, it's not a training problem, it's a clarity problem.
My takeaway from all of this has been that progression plans are great. I use progression plans in my training. And the thing that people, I think, miss is that within those progression plans, there are tiny little steps, and there are things that I've used the same progression plan for 6 or 7 dogs. But how each dog progresses through that progression plan from step to step to step varies because of how they learn, their reinforcement type, and all of those sorts of things. And yes, I absolutely, because sometimes you reinforce, whether you mean to or not, you reinforce a mistake, or you reinforce a behavior that's not at criteria. And it happens. And you just have to be able to recognize some of the information that the dog is giving back to you and not be, dog training is not a recipe. And so each of our dogs are individual learners. and we have our own sets of skills and biases that we bring to the table. So with that, ladies, thank you for a great episode. And we're going to go train in the building. So everybody go train.
Canine Detection Collaborative! We appreciate the time you spend with us. If you liked this episode, not only should you follow us so you don't miss the next one, but please also rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. For info on collaborating with us, go to k9detectioncollaborative.com. That's K9detectioncollaborative.com, where you can find our socials and pick up our latest monthly freebie. Join us again to talk training in the next episode.